you all for accepting our invitation. So I'm appreciating the in-person, participants, and I know we have virtual participants. So this is a hybrid symposium, and would like to just start on a high note and start it well. And to keep time, I know our chief guest, Senator Professor Margaret Kamar, she is presiding over the House. She has to go before 10 o'clock, but we'll try to, get all the information she has. I know the chairman of IGRTC also will be leaving before 11 o'clock, so we'll manage, but we intend to actually finish, before 11 o'clock. So once again, my name is GK Ndongo. I'm the moderator, for the symposium, and today is a day to have a conversation. So as a country, we had long conversations, long debates that culminated into the new constitution. I wonder whether it is still new. I wonder whether we call a 10-year-old a child or a baby. So it's not an infant conversation, a constitution. And one of the things that we did that was a game changer was reorganize government. So reorganized government because we decided the way government was organized as a centralized system of government, it wasn't working. So we reorganized government and we said we want a devolved system of government. And you got the objectives of that redesigned, system of government. And it is important to have that understanding that the reorganizing of government was not, and coming up with a devolved system of governance, it is not just for service delivery. It means many things. How government will deliver services, how development and growth will happen. So we want to have that conversation and say, with this arrangement that we adopted, how are things happening? And for us, today we'll confine ourselves to the devolved system of government from a standpoint of then funding devolution. So, and it is interesting, we're having this conversation today. I'm sure the chairman for IGRTC will things they discussed at IBEC in terms of how monies were allocated. You have the senator, Professor Margaret Kamar. She will also, I'm sure, be saying that I normally like to tell her, because she's representing the Senate, she's representing the Speaker of the Senate, I feel like they hold the knife to sort of slash the arm, in terms of then how resources, will go to the county. So today, this is a symposium that is sponsored by the partnership between International Budget Partnership Kenya, IBP Kenya, and Institute of Public Policy and Governance, which is a think tank domiciled at the Strathmore Business School. And thank you very much, Strathmore, for hosting us. We love the facilities, we love the seats, it reminds some of us, like, we only saw these seats in movie theaters, so it sort of gives you, that comfort. So we, the partnership, thought it's a good idea to have a symposium to have conversation and have 4 objectives. One is evaluate the effectiveness of the current funding and ask the question, what are the opportunities? What have been the challenges? What are the trends? The second objective is how can we strengthen the intergovernmental fiscal relations? It's an important conversation because the product is resources and hoping that that then is reflected in service delivery. The third one is having a conversation of sustainable funding strategies. And sustainability here also has to do with, predictability. Some of those things. I need to know when monies come, and then I can plan for it. And obviously, the fourth objective is accountability and transparency, from the entire value chain, from the planning to participation to inclusion to prioritizing development, projects in the counties, and obviously implementation and oversight, and it being very, citizen-centric. So as I said, so this is a hybrid, so we have virtual participants, and we have the in-person. So would like to have can I call it a balcony view conversation? How do we see things from where we are? How does IGRTC see things? How does, how do the development partners who are supporting, devolution, how do they see things? So balcony view. So it's a conversation. And that background I'm giving will help us, even as the participants, even as the panelists, to sort of get that understanding. How do we have this conversation, trends, challenges, but importantly also ask ourselves, so what are the opportunities, in funding, devolution? So I think that's a good background. So without much, wouldn't waste more time, we'll get into it. I am sure you have a program. If it is not printed, you have it, you've scanned it somewhere. I am sure someone has done that. So in terms of how to budget your time, so we'll get into the welcoming remarks, opening remarks, and then allow me to give an apology. We're expecting CRA to give a statement in the sense that it's the organization with the mandate to sort of develop the equitable formula. They are delayed, but we'll see what to do. We'll slot them in somewhere, and then after that we have the chief guest, Senator Professor Margaret Kamar, and then we'll get into a plenary, which that will be moderated by Dr. Rugo, and then we'll get questions, from the plenary and even from the virtual participants, and I hope they can hear me. I hope someone is able to confirm, that they can hear me. So thank you very much, John. So we'll get into the welcoming remarks, which will be done by Strathmore University, and then we'll get into the opening remarks that will be done by Dr. Rugo. So allow me to introduce the first three, speakers. So I'll introduce Dr. Madhuva, and I'll introduce Dr. Rugo, and I'll also introduce, and I'm very proud to say this, my teacher, Senator Professor. So yeah, she's my teacher. So yeah, just take a second to have that sink in. So let me do that. So Dr. David Madhuva, currently he's Associate Dean, Academic and Student Affairs here at the Strathmore Business School. He also serves the Academic Director, MSc Development Finance, and I also know he's cooking something to introduce a PhD program in public policy. So those who are interested, you can see him. David holds a PhD in Business Administration, Accounting and Finance option. He has a Master of Commerce in Forensic Accounting and a first-class honors degree in Bachelor's of Commerce, Finance. He's a member of ISPAC, and also he's an associate member of the Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE. I've never heard of it. And also he's a fellow of Higher Education Academy in the UK. When you hear his profile, he will not waste our time like me. He won't talk a lot. Dr. Abraham Rugo, his name, complete name, Dr. Abraham Rugo Moreu, and I think we abbreviated that, socially we call him ARMS. Sometimes it's also good to sort of get to know some of this background. He's passionate and committed to advance local development. He has a wealth of experience working in decentralization, participatory governance, and public finance management in Kenya. He's worked over 15 years, and his work has entailed supporting citizens to participate in and advocate for improved service delivery by government and at the national and local level. And he does this mostly in research and analysis, but also importantly in influencing policy. But I also know he also participates in policy development. And now it is my distinguished honor to introduce the chief guest, my teacher, but for now, Senator Professor Margaret Kamar. She is a nominated senator from Uasin Gishu County. It is not called Eldoret County, it is Uasin Gishu County. You would be surprised about geography in this country. It's not Eldoret County, it is Uasin Gishu County. Prior to that, she served one term in the Senate after being elected as the Senator of Uasin Gishu, and served as the Deputy Speaker from 2020 to 2022. Honorable Kamar has an outstanding career background centered around environmental conservation. She became the Director at International Center for Research in Sustainable Development in 2013. She also served as the Assistant Minister of Environment and Mineral Resources from 2010 to 2011, and from 2011 to 2013. She was, prior to that, the Minister for Higher Education. Then it was Ministry of Higher Education and Science and Technology. She was a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, and there she chaired the Environmental, Natural Resources and Agriculture Committee. That was between 1996 to 2006. She holds a bachelor's degree in agriculture and specializing in soil and water conservation from McGill University, that is in Canada. She has a doctorate in soil and water conservation from the University of Toronto. Professor Kamar became a professor of soil science at Moy University, where she taught me in 1999. She has over 20 years. Taught and lectured on soil and water conservation and land use management. And she also worked as a consultant with the UNEP. In her last term at the Senate, Professor Kamar was a chairperson of the ad hoc committee on the maize crisis. We hope you sorted out many things there. She was also the vice chair of the education committee, again, at the Senate, and currently she's a member of the Senate Standing Committee on Education and serves in different caucuses on topical issues. Since I know her, allow me to say, I think two things that I think this bio has missed. Professor was the inaugural chair of the Budget Committee in National Assembly from 2008 to 2012, so she contributed big time to democratizing the budget making process. Professor, again, when she was the Minister for Higher Education, she is the one who, led the development of the policies and the legislation that was, that was assimilating the new constitution in the education system. So let's clap for our three panelists and the chief guest. So allow me now to invite you, Dr. Madhuva, for your welcoming remarks, and then thereafter, Dr. Rugo. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, GK. The chief guest, Professor Senator Margaret Kamar, our panel of eminent speakers who will be with us here today, discussing matters public policy, the participants, both physically present and those who are online. Good morning. Morning once again. Welcome. Welcome to Strathmore University. Welcome to Strathmore University Business School. We are very happy to host this wonderful forum where we'll be having discussions around matters that are very pertinent to this country of ours. Now that we got into devolution and we're discussing matters, how do we get it funded? Just a little bit about the business school. As GK has just mentioned, we have here the Institute of Public Policy and Governance, and that is the institute which takes care of research, capacity building, these kind of forums and the likes, and we are so happy to connect with all of you. This is where we link academia and industry to make sure that whatever discussions come out of it are things that can be put into practice. But alongside, on the academic side, we have the Master of Public Policy and Management, and I believe a number of us might have gone through it or might have taught in it. And here we welcome you industry people in public policy to partner with our faculty to deliver that experience in class. As GK has mentioned, we're actively thinking about a PhD in public policy. And again, before this happens, we really engage the industry to make sure that whatever comes out of that is something that works for the issues that are facing us. GK has also said that I'm a member of the ISPAC, and I believe accountants have a role to play in this. And I think the other day you saw, if whoever has the slides can just flip through, if you look at the conversations that have been happening in the Public Accounts Committee and the discussions there are so many issues around accountability and, things touching on the use of the funds. And here we are looking at what counties are allocated and how are they making use of these funds. And a lot of things have come out here. And I had a chance just to look at whatever goes to the counties vis-a-vis what the counties are able to generate themselves. And someone just did some analysis. I wish the person with the slides can just show everything. When you look at the statistics, and this is just something from the controller of the Office of the Control of Budget, you'll see what counties are expected to generate and what they've raised. And if you do your math, that is a very small proportion of what they've gotten from the national kitty. It's just about 15%. That is what they are expected. But if you look at what they actually raise, it's just about 9%, which is, to me, very low. And this speaks to innovation in funding, thinking outside the box, or even, if possible, without the box, and the likes. And if you look at this analysis, if we could just go flip. If you could go to, here we just see the potential. I mean, counties have the potential, but the question is, are they tapping into that potential? Like Nairobi County here, whoever was doing the analysis said, Nairobi County can raise 65, own source, not what they get from the national kitty. The one which can raise the lowest is Tana River County. They can raise 522 million. But the question is, are they able to get to that level? What exactly is happening down in the counties? And are counties working together with each other? And now, as I said, being an accountant, where we come when it comes to accountability, and if we could just go to the next slide. When it comes to accountability, and you look at how the funds are being used in our counties, the state is, as you can see there. This is some analysis which was done by the Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and you can clearly see from the audits done, I believe by the Office of the Auditor General, you can see very few counties are getting what we call unqualified reports. All right? Unqualified is like a clean audit report. And I think there's been this push towards a zero-fault audit, all right, when it comes to counties. But you can see the state there with the counties. Majority have been getting qualified. Adverse. In auditing, if you get an adverse opinion, that is a very serious state of affairs, I can tell you. It's very serious. Very, very serious. And now there are even some counties getting what we call disclaimer. A disclaimer is like, we can't say much about how you've been spending these funds. Now that is a very sorry state of affairs. And I believe in forums such as what we are having here, I believe these are some of the matters that will be discussed. How can we reverse this? Of course, the accountants have voiced what they will do, starting with their members. I, being a member of the ISPAC, I have a role to play in this. And I believe we have accountants all over. The other table there just talks about the ministries, the agencies, and the likes. But the state there looks better than the counties. I think that's a message you are seeing there. If you look at how the ministries are spending the funds and how they are making use of that compared to the counties, you can see counties have some work to do. As I welcome you, I believe by participating in this forum, you'll have a chance to voice what you have and also contribute towards in a meaningful way towards improving this state of affairs, and also generating ideas on what counties can do to also increase their funding base. Once again, welcome to Strathmore University. And on behalf of the Dean of the school, Dr. Caesar Mwangi, I want to wish you a fantastic forum, and let's make the most out of this forum. Thank you very much.
Let's appreciate him. And now we are now legally and officially welcomed, so now we can be free. Dr. Rugo?
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be able to join us this morning. And first of all, I want to bring our best regards from the International Budget Partnership Kenya. And it's such a joy for us to be able to partner with IPPG and the entire Strathmore Business School. Our relationship with this school goes far because our founding executive director was also part of this faculty. Dr. Jason Lekin did teach here. But secondly, is also to appreciate that we can have these kind of conversations. As one who has been in this space perhaps long than I want to admit, lest you start calculating my age, from 2005, when we did the first referendum in Kenya and the discussions around that, I think it's been interesting to observe and to be in the same space for an entire working career as it were. Our chief guest, Senator Professor Margaret Kamar, and all colleagues, all panelists who are here, I want to appreciate you for coming. We also want to appreciate those who are joining us online for this discussion. I will not belabor what has already been said, but perhaps to say that one of the tenets of devolution is that we will have consultation and cooperation. And that vision appearing, I think it must be in Article 6 of our Constitution, paves the way. Then when you go to Articles number 10, which basically, the values, including participation, and accountability in governance, sets the pace for why we must continue to have conversations with one another around how. Now, important is that devolution is a choice of form of government that we have given to ourselves as Kenyans. Again, at the onset, I like to clarify some things. That devolution, whereas it has to do with the creation of county governments, is not about county governments. It is about the distribution of functions between a national government and county governments. I think that's very, very important for us to remember. And therefore, it's the DNA that informs how we organize our public governance. And that is important because when we are thinking about what we provide for ourselves in 186, 187, and 187, 188, 189, read together with Schedule 4, we realize that actually what we do is distribute functions, responsibility. We call that, in theory, subsidiarity principle, where the unit, every unit performs the function that it is best able to perform. And therefore, for this today, when we talk about our discussion for today, which has to do with devolution, funding devolution, there are a couple of questions that I want to lay up front for us to consider even as we discuss today. First of all, is the whole discussion around how do we effectively unbundle and cost functions. Our constitutional framework provides that functions are to be followed by finances, which therefore implies that we need to know who is doing what, and therefore we can be able to allocate the sufficient resources. That remains a question, and unless we can be able to discuss that and perhaps even update it to the 2023 costs and 2024 costs, perhaps we may not be able to ever resolve the discussion about are county governments getting their fair share. Is the national government getting its fair share of the resources? So the whole question around how do we best unbundle and what model do we use of costing of functions, and that perhaps could settle. The second discussion is a discussion around what is the growth factor that we will use, we will apply in determining how much resource. The division of revenue conversation, which will be spoken to a bit more in detail later, has always been marred by controversy. And the controversy here has to do with, on one hand, you have the National Treasury, and we have a representative here. And on the other hand, you have county governments, and in between there, you have CRA, Senate, and the National Assembly, trying to broker, and IBEC included. And one is saying we have given you sufficient, the other one is saying we don't have enough. County governments are saying they don't have enough. Should we use a growth factor, for instance, of how revenue grows year on year? Should we apply inflation? Should we apply GDP growth? All these are questions, and I use all those figures because in different years we have used different. In fact, the Senate report on the division of revenue raises a question around what is the growth factor that is being applied from year to year. And that's a second issue. But as we think about the growth factor, as a basis of division of revenue, we also want to ask ourselves a question that we have not quite resolved, which has to do with the use of the most recent audited accounts versus the annual spending for the year we are budgeting for. Again, that remains a discussion that needs to be held because, as you know, year-on-year revenue growth has been happening. Revenue is growing from year on year, and perhaps that's a matter that we may want to have a conversation. But lastly, are emerging issues, and particularly the interpretation of where public debt falls and national interest. Now that is important because this has to be deducted upfront before we divide, we share, we do the equitable share. Public debt has become a significant matter. And why public debt? Because public debt has two angles. The first angle is that public debt is supposed to facilitate development across the country. So there's a question there about how equitable are the proceeds of public debt, which are supposed to finance capital expenditure, being distributed. So in other words, you can say every county is benefiting. There's that side. But there's the other side of it, where the question of the servicing of public debt and the effects, the knock-on effects that it has, first of all, to how much gets allocated to counties, but more importantly, how well and how fiducious the disbursements happen. And you've had, policymakers, including the president, say we delayed to transfer money to counties because we needed to pay public debt. So you need to see public debt from both sides, both in terms of how it facilitates, but also how it challenges. But a last one is, what is the place of county-owned source revenue? And thank you, Dr. Mduva, though he has stepped out, he has talked about it. When you look at Article 209 of the Constitution, which provides for what counties and what the national government can levy, how much can we expect to generate from own source revenue? And this is not me defending counties, but the question is, the same business person who needs to pay a business permit, who needs to pay for advertising, also needs to pay for VAT, also is paying for income tax, is also going to, so in other words, it's the same pot we are trying to pull from the same, so, and they are not just business permit, there are a plethora of permits, both within county and even across county if you're doing business across county. How much are we reaching a point, having addressed all efficiency aspects, having addressed all administrative leakages, how much can own source revenue actually become an alternative source of funding? Or is it time to think, like what we saw in Laikipia, starting to think of other models? But secondly, how can we maximize the equitable sharing so that then it facilitates? Because in our constitutional model, we seem to have suggested that the big framework that we want, the main source of how we fund county governments is going to be. So those are some of the questions. But a last question that I want to place on the table is that there has also been significant and serious accountability questions, emanating from largely 2 points. One is cross-purpose kind of interventions, or what we call a lack of coordination, duplication of efforts, where on one hand you have county governments doing the same thing. The current flooding situation is a good example. The national government is making an intervention, county governments are making interventions, but also you have players in between here who are also making interventions. Where is the place of intergovernmental relations and coordination especially? Because that then means that we are applying every resource in the most efficient way practically possible and avoiding double funding. But the second one is the very accountability of that every shilling that is committed for the different services is being spent. So those are some of the questions that we want to attempt to answer today, but also to say that this is part of a long conversation. IBP has been part of the institutions that have submitted a memorandum on division of revenue for the last 12 years. John Kenodia has been there through it all. We've submitted on every division of revenue to this particular point, and therefore we see that as a critical place. But in terms of our partnership with Strathmore, one of the things that we are also doing is that we think it is time to also better equip professionals and players in this space. And therefore, we are going to be launching an executive education course on devolution and public finance management. We think it is a critical aspect. We have tested it at IBP through a program we call the Budget Facilitators Program, and we have seen just how much that is turning around, and we think that pushing it to a broader, and that is, in addition to, we will be inviting, we'll be making the calls, and when we see that, please do feel free to participate. But lastly, is inviting all of us to become the agents of devolution, the ambassadors of devolution, those fighting for devolution. Because sometimes we all seem to talk about it, but very few people present themselves, as it were, in the ring to push this agenda. Whether it's through research, whether it is through the various advocacy frameworks, whether it's through writing for those who are in the media and the different spaces. And with that, I look forward to the conversations for the rest of today. Thank you very much. Back to GK.
Let's appreciate him better. So there you have it from Dr. Rugo. So chief guest and all of us, this is what we've been challenged. If you think of debt as rent, the way rent is a must, and your significant other says, should we continue staying in this house so that we have more money for food, clothes, and school fees? Or should we move? Food for thought. Champions of devolution. I like to give an example that is personal to me and why we should be champions of devolution so that services can work. My mother, who is in Moranga, is 85 years old. Currently, I am unable to buy her a medical insurance because there is none in the market that covers her because she's 85. We used to do it until she was 80, Judy. Now there is none. If you know any, please let me know. If my mother gets sick, her first place she'll go to hospital is a county hospital. So it's for you, Dr. Rugo, your mother, who I know. So all of us in this room, whether we are doing it from a research point of view, policy influence, analysis, the debate, the conversation, if devolution works, it is for the benefit to all of us. Because, Senator Professor, I am sure every day, this phone of yours rings, people asking for money to go to hospital. IGRC's chairman, I am sure you're in a WhatsApp group fundraising money for a Kenyan who needs to go to India. Fellow citizens, if devolution works, we will significantly improve our public service systems, all of them, whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it is infrastructure, even disaster response. Fantastic. So Dr. Rugo has, laid it out, but what do we have for you in terms of the themes for today's conversation, and then the lineup. So it is about exploring sustainable and, I guess, innovative way of equitable, sharing of revenue. Predictability is a theme that we'll be discussing today. Then the Senate's role, in terms of securing funding for counties, and obviously related to that issues of delays and all that. We also are having a conversation about intergovernmental fiscal relations, and then there's a conversation about the utilization of funds and the accountability. So what is your lineup? And it is not in any order. Mr. Kipturus, who is from National Treasury. In government, there is no, gap. He's representing the Principal Secretary. Mr. Kipturus, Samuel Kipturus, he is from National Treasury. Mr. Joseph Kimani, he is from the Royal Danish Embassy in Nairobi. He's representing the Devolution Donor Working Group, so a perspective of development partners in supporting devolution. Mr. Kiragu Kithinji, chairman of IGRTC, and I see Victor, you are there. It's good to recognize, he's come with a few of his colleagues. And then Ms. Judy Oduma, she's a team leader, Kenya Devolution Program, which is supported by FCDO, or British High Commission in Nairobi, and also giving a perspective of just working with counties and government agencies in terms of institutional policy strengthening to enhance to deepen devolution, Ms. Wanjiru Gikonyo. She loves the name Shiro. Ms. Wanjiru Gikonyo, she is bringing the perspective and the voice of the citizen, you know, in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency, and then, no, you're not in the panel. So that is what you have, you know, in the panel. So for now, allow me to invite, and it's my honor, I'm very honored to invite, you know, the chief guest, Senator Professor Margaret Kamau. She's a chief guest. Because she will be leaving and she will not manage to join the panel, we requested that after her, you know, keynote, you know, address, she can, you know, take 2 or 3 questions. Let's put our hands together for Senator Professor. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be in an academic setup after a long time. This is the area I used to be many years ago, 21 years, working for Moi University. And it always feels nice to be in an auditorium where students also are. David Matuva has gone. I wanted to do the salutations. I want to recognize Dr. Rugo, who has just spoken and made wonderful, wonderful statements. And I want to recognize all the panelists that have been outlined for the topic that is before us today. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the Speaker of Senate. And you know, when you come on behalf of somebody and he writes a speech, you don't want to add anything to the speech. So please allow me to make my own little remarks ahead of that so that I read the speech as is required. I'm very delighted to be first to be here, and secondly, I want to thank the organizers of this symposium on funding of devolution in Kenya, looking at the current trends, looking at the challenges, and looking at opportunities. 10 years on, devolution is 10 years old, and it is truly the right time to do stock taking, as it worked, as it worked. Kenya is an amazing country. We love our country, and we chose a different pattern of development, and I thank God that I lived to see the fight over the devolution process. I happen to have been in the women caucus that participated in the making of the Constitution in Bomas. And the real issue became resources. And because the real issue became resources, the clamor for devolution, apart from democracy and everything, it became very important to actually decide what kind of government we are going to have, what kind of administration we wanted the country to go through. And devolution won today. I still believe devolution is the winner, and that is where we should be going to. So as my student GK was saying, if devolution works, it is not if devolution works, when it works, because it must work. We have to deal with it, panel pit it, do whatever we must do until it works. It must work. If you tell a Kenyan now in Garissa that you want to retract devolution, they'll tell you are dreaming. We only went to a Senate to Turkana for our devolution conference, our Senate Mashinani, the other day. And I think everybody knows what happened there. We got our Senate committee on devolution and finance to go around to see what has happened in Turkana. They came back disappointed, and they said, in fact, this county is a crimes zone because everything we were told exists doesn't exist. But talk to the people, the Kenyans of Turkana, and you ask them, and they'll tell you, no, devolution should never go. So it is when it happens and what must be do to make sure that it works, because this is extremely important. Dr. Ruga has mentioned 2 profound things. One touches on who we are as Senate. In Senate, we do the oversight of the funding. He talked about accounting for every shilling. This is what we are running after in Senate. Sometimes you hear saying, who elected 47 thieves? It's because we are running for that shilling, to see whether accountability of these shillings that go to the counties can actually be achieved. So we are also on the race trying to catch up with that shilling to make sure that it is well done. But I like the way he closed, that we must all be champions for devolution. Surely, if we believed in it in 2010 and implemented it, we must run with it, all of us. It cannot be Senate alone doing oversight and the county assemblies doing oversight. In Senate, we say county assemblies are being disabled on the ground. So they have been disabled. So they are not able to ensure that there's accountability. So at the same time, we therefore need people outside the two structures, the two formal structures, that is the Senate and the county assembly, to ensure that accountability is taken care of and oversight is taken care of. Hence, the important statement by Dr. Ruko that all of us must be agents of devolution. All of us must demand accountability. The Constitution has also allowed that. There is something called public participation. And I have made speeches to county assemblies. I think I've talked to all county assemblies in this country from 2013 to 2014. And I'm so impressed that people who believe in devolution don't die. They're always there. I look at my sister here. She was in the Council of Governors at the time, and I would go home, they call me back, and they say, let's go to Garissa. Come back, we want you to go to Homa Bay. And we did a lot of good work in devolution, but we need to ask ourselves, those of us who believe in it, we need to recruit more people to believe in devolution so that we can actually change this country. So Judy, congratulations. I thought you were coming from the County Speakers Forum. Now I've discovered you haven't moved on, but you are not living devolution. So those of us who have been recruited, who believe in devolution, don't change. And those of you in this room who have attended this session, please be the champions that we require. Because what the Constitution does is to bring in two aspects. It brings something called public participation, as I said. Public participation produces a product in counties every 5 years called the County Integrated Development Plan. That document should meet a master plan that is obeyed. The reason there is no good relationship between our shillings and the development of the county is that it is disobeyed immediately it is passed. And these are some of the things that we need to start asking ourselves. I always told students, even in youth in Wasingishu, and students in the universities, I met them in the university, I said, when you hear there is a forum called public participation, go there. You are part of the public. Go and demand that your village requires a dispensary and make sure it is in the CIDP. Once it is in the CIDP, do the frequent visits to demand that it must be completed, because we need pressure from all sides. Because as you all know, and the Bible says this, man has failed and we are all sinners. So we don't know how our shillings cannot be accounted for, but we know that we are not getting value for what we even move to the counties. So I want to encourage us that we be true champions of devolution and that we move with it. Once you are converted, convert another person, because Kenyans would like to see, they are very happy with devolution, but they are not getting 50% or 25% of the value of the money that they have. So we need to fight on and move on until we reach there. With those remarks, therefore, allow me to read the speech from my speaker, who was supposed to be the chief guest in this function, the Right Honorable Amason Chefa Kingi. I will read it as it is, and then I'll take the 2 or 3 questions and answer as myself. Thank you, Dr. David Muthura, who has just left, Dr. Abraham Rugo, Executive Director, International Budget Partnership, Kenya, members of the Strathmore University fraternity, all invited guests, including the eminent panelists who are here. I'm indeed honored and humbled to join you for this policy dialogue event. It is indeed a privilege to have the opportunity on behalf of the Senate to address such a distinguished audience of policy scholars. From the onset, I wish to register my sincere gratitude to the organizers for according the Senate an opportunity to discuss a topic that is close to my heart as the Speaker of the House, and that is constitutionally mandated to protect the interests of the counties and their governments. Funding of devolution in Kenya is a very important part of our role in Senate. This symposium is not only timely, but also strategic, as it comes at a time when we continue to take stock and assess the milestones of devolution 10 years on. Most importantly, this is the opportune time to offer tangible, sustainable, and transformative policy solutions that strive to fill the existing gaps in the implementation of devolution, including funding. And it's 10 years for us, by the way, is a very important thing in the Senate because we have gone full cycle. We have senators who have become governors, and we have governors who have become senators. So things, the devolution is being understood now differently from what it was at the beginning. Before I embark on the substantive topic of this, of which I have been called upon to speak, let me acknowledge that the country's decision to adopt a multi-level governance structure in 2010 was a fundamental shift in policy, not only in decentralizing political power, but in the quest to embrace inclusive and responsive development and participatory governance. My remarks are therefore primarily informed by Article 174 of the Constitution 2010, which prescribes the end goal of this remarkable political arrangement. Most importantly, my remarks are inspired and premised on the views of several political scientists, more specifically the seminal works of Berry and Berry 1990. He opines that subnational governments have the potential to encourage policy innovation and therefore operate as policy laboratories, experimenting with new ideas, abandoning failure and opportunities for lesson drawing and spreading of best practices. I believe that these ideas should form the basis of our deliberation on devolution, including funding. Without taking so much time on that, I will begin by highlighting the mechanisms the Senate has applied and uses to secure funding for devolution. I will then pinpoint some of the gaps and then crown it all with opportunities for consideration, and I will then conclude some points with some points of action. Honorable delegates, Senate's role in securing funding for devolution is outlined as follows. The role of the Senate in devolution cannot be overemphasized. According to Article 96(1) of the Constitution of Kenya, 2010, the Senate has the sole mandate to represent the interests of counties and their governments. Most significantly, subsection 3 bestows upon the Senate the role of determining determining the allocation both vertically, that is between levels of government, and horizontally, that is between counties. And it exercises oversight over national revenue allocated to the county governments. It goes without saying that this is the most essential role of the Senate. In securing the interests of the counties with respect to funding, it is essential to reiterate that Senate is guided by Article 202, Section 1 and 2 of the Constitution on equitable revenue sharing, with not less than 15% of the previous year of audited and approved national accounts. It is this principle that informs the passage of both the Division of Revenue Bill and the County Allocation Revenue Bill. It is on record, however, that over the last 10 years, the passage of the Division of Revenue Bill has continuously elicited mixed reactions. There have been occasionally stalemates, back and forth engagements between the two houses, the Treasury and the Senate. Obviously, in any democratic arrangement, this is expected, as these consistent efforts and advocacy have resulted in an increase of, but these consistent efforts and advocacy have resulted in an increase in the allocation of equitable shares. In the year 2013-2014, we had the first allocation, which was 190 billion, and it grew over time. I will read the last one, which is 2022, 2023, 370 billion, 2023, 2024, 385 billion. So over time, it has been growing. It's about double. Yes, slightly more than double over the 10 years. In fact, as we assess devolution in the last 10 years, it should be noted that the Senate has appropriated to counties up to 2.6 trillion as the equitable share between 2013, 2014, and 2021, 2022. In the same spirit, the Senate also proposed marginal increase in the shareable revenues to county governments in the year's 2024 budget policy statement for 2024-2025 to 415.95 billion, one which we are still debating. We have just passed it. It's gone back to the National Assembly, and we might still be having the back and forth debate as to why we believe differently in the different houses. The other important mechanism of funding devolution that the Senate utilizes is the resourcing counties. In resourcing counties is the conditional allocation grants to pursuant to Article 2 or 2.2 of the Constitution. First, I wish to recognize the third arm of government, the judiciary, as it continuously steps in to offer the jurisprudence on matters of devolution. So we have had cases in court, and we are all aware that whenever we are at stalemate, then we go for the third party so that we have a neutral assessor and evaluator of the arguments for and against. In line with the court ruling 2 years ago, which gave direction on how conditional grants should be appropriated, the Senate has incessantly considered the county government's additional allocation bill. With this framework, the county governments are able to access the national government's share of revenue or grants from development partners. In this regard, the Senate proposed an allocation of 50 billion as additional allocation to counties in the year 2014 budget policy statement compared to the 46 billion approved in the previous financial year. Deliberations on funding counties must also include the place of equalization fund in addressing historical inequalities in the country. An equalization fund was one of the hottest topics during the development of the Constitution, because everybody says we have gone to devolution, and if we are going to share resources, what happens to counties that were less developed at the point when devolution came in? And this is a very important aspect of discussion when it comes to development of counties. As you may be aware, the fund is actualized under Article 204 in the Constitution. Is a form of affirmative action where marginalized communities receive additional funding equivalent to 0.5% of the revenue collected nationally in support of specific services and infrastructure, not limited to, but dominantly for water, for roads, for health facilities, and electricity. Those are the areas of inequalities that were highly identified, both during the development of the Constitution itself and thereafter, when as the Constitution was being implemented. Suffice to say that the Senate has stepped up to ensure the regularization of the fund through the regularization. In addition to ring-fencing the allegations, there was a court case that impeded the implementation of the projects. However, early this year, in the month of February, the court resolved to have the planned projects take off. Usually, the counties are expected to submit the prerequisite documents for approval, which culminates in tender awarding. Yes, this money for equalization is actually money that is protected. It is not going to be spent anyhow by a county. It is, as I said, allocated for roads, for water, health facilities, and electricity. What has been agreed is an inequality that was seen in the country, and that is what has delayed. That money has been delayed over 5 years, over the 10 years, and we are starting to see allocations now going. But it's again ring-fenced, so it doesn't disappear, which is the nice thing about that, and I think Treasurer will be able to confirm that. I wish to add that all of the above may not be feasible if the Senate fails to determine the basis for allocating these resources. How do we then distribute between County A and County B? This is where the Senate comes in to do what we are calling the horizontal distribution of resources. So it's not only in the funding that is given directly, but also in this very important fund that is an affirmative fund. This basis recognizes 8 parameters whose aim is to promote fairness and equity in resource distribution and to enhance service delivery through functional allocation of revenue. On that note, and pursuant to Article 217 of the Constitution, every 5 years, the Senate debates and passes this mechanism, popularly known as the formula. So every 5 years, we pass the formula for allocation of resources, because obviously 1 year is different. After every 5 years, we have to assess whether the same formula still applies, because if the formula was to take care of certain needs, tarmac roads, when you build a tarmac, you don't have to go back to rebuild it. So there are a few areas that must be modified, and that is what Senate always debates, and every 5 years, every new Senate debates that. Current allocation and appropriation are therefore based on the third formula approved in September 2013. Appreciating the complexities associated with resource mobilization and appropriation in the context of the multi-level government structure, success in such processes calls for continuous and deliberate vertical consultations and cooperation. In that respect, a representative of the Parliamentary Service Commission represents the Senate's interests at the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council, IBEC, which is the apex policy organ on matters of finance and budget. What's more, the role of the Senate in securing resources for the Senate cannot be discussed within the confines of appropriation alone. However, it must also be in the context of effective and robust oversight. The Senate has the constitutional mandate, and beyond that, owes it to the people of Kenya to ensure that the expenditures are prudent and in accordance with the law, upholding accountability, transparency, and fiscal discipline. The Senate, through the County Public Accounts and the County Public Investment and Special Funds Committee for the Special Fund, seeks to achieve this goal by scrutinizing the reports of the Auditor General and the Comptroller of Budget. Worth noting is that over the years, the Senate has adapted to the emerging concerns and unintended consequences of the earlier established oversight mechanisms. To this end, the objective of scrutiny has shifted from purely examining the regularity of expenditure for broader concerns, including but not limited to the effectiveness of public programs, risk management, value for money, and calling for evidence from a broader base of stakeholders, but including representatives from the private sector. In this respect, annual audit reports show a significant improvement in money in county management or public finances. For instance, the majority of the reports in 2013-2014 were either adverse or disclaimers, and this was put forward earlier by the previous presenter. And in 2018-2019, the county audit reports provided either a disqualified or undisqualified opinion. So improvements have taken place, however slow they have been. This assessment is an indication that county financial statements are more likely to describe county financial positions accurately. However, a lot more is required to ensure public resources are safeguarded and utilized for the intended purpose. Now let's look at the challenges in the context of the Senate's role in securing funding. It is in the public domain that the constitutional role of resourcing developed units has not been without its fair share of institutional, intergovernmental, and resource-related setbacks. It is regrettable that despite the annual appropriation, perennial delays in dispersing these funds persist 10 years on. Perennial delays has been one of the main things. Kenyan counties and Kenyans in particular bear the brunt of such missteps. These delays significantly slow down services and by extension economic activities, which in turn has a trickle effect on economic growth in respective counties and ultimately impacts the growth in own source revenue, because if it doesn't grow, then it means it cannot bear any fruit. These delays have also affected the implementation of budgeted activities and disrupted service delivery to citizens. To address the concern related to delays in disbursement, with the input of National Treasury, the Senate annually adopts a cash disbursement schedule of transfers to county governments. Unfortunately, these guidelines are generally overlooked and rarely adhered to. That is the other challenge. Similarly, the incomplete transfer of exclusive functions to counties and corresponding resources, in addition to ambiguities in concurrent functions, remain unresolved. And this is another very big one, where Schedule 4 states clearly what functions were supposed to be devolved, but the devolution first of those activities has not been completed. And I know we have somebody in the panel, the IGTRC will be here to say a few things about that. But more than that, the transfer of functions have not been followed by the transfer of resources. And it goes back to the question, have we valued the question that was raised earlier by GK, have we actually valued our activities, even in Schedule 4? The constitutional requirement of Equalization Fund and its subsequent launch in 2012, notwithstanding, its actual impact is difficult to ascertain, as actual implementation only commenced upon the passage of the regulations in 2021. The delays occasioned by the absence of policy and legal frameworks, including a lack of consensus on the criteria for identifying marginalized communities, are now resolved. However, it is concerning that despite the total entitlement of 54 billion, since its establishment, Parliament has only appropriated 26 billion, with utilization being below 50, which means utilization is below 50%. And as I mentioned, this is ring-fenced money, so it is money that will not be used for anything else. To sum up, the risks of funding elaborated earlier, suboptimal county performance in planning and budgeting continues to undermine the Senate's efforts to secure funding. A review of the report of the Comptroller of Budget and the AG reveals non-compliance with the law on fiscal responsibility, non-compliance with the law on fiscal responsibility, particularly with respect to the wage bill. Counties are reported to be in breach of Regulation 25(1)(b) of the Public Finance Management Act, Regulation 2015, which prohibits expenditure exceeding 35% of total revenue. So most of our money actually goes to the county, and it goes for non-development, because it was supposed to be capped at 35% for so that we have 70% development, but it is the reverse. So these are some of the challenges. Closely linked to wage bill are the spiraling bending bills, and we are discussing currently on the floor in the House the issue of bending bills in counties. We are trying to look for another solution of how to deal with them, all of which are linked to weaknesses in the budget planning, execution at the county level, and that is what the Senate is trying to address right now. It is therefore against this background that county governments have continuously raised concerns about the adequacy and have called for an increase in equitable share, citing insufficient funding. I am aware that following this clamor for additional funding, the most recent proposal is to amend the Constitution through the National Dialogue Committee, the NATCO committee that was in Bomas, to increase county allocation to at least 20% of all revenue raised by government. Such a bold proposal, if adopted, in the long run, will require political goodwill from the executive and national treasury, as the current 15% is still a challenge after 10 years. But as we are saying, even with that increase, we need to start looking back. As Senate, we are looking at how then the accountability of what has been given is being done. Honorable participants, what are the opportunities? Allow me to indulge you in some of the opportunities that Senate considers the low-lying fruits amidst the prevailing challenges and limitations. It's also my hope that this meeting of minds will generate tangible and sustainable policy solutions to address this persisting funding conundrum. Firstly, the Senate considers the finalization of the transfer of all devolved functions, as well as the rationalization of the national government budgets to complement the transfers as imperative. In this regard, the Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Affairs is working closely with relevant agencies to actualize this transfer of functions. Secondly, the Senate is of the view that persistent delays in the disbursement of county funds by the National Treasury are inexcusable, particularly against the backdrop of existing annual cash disbursement schedules passed by the Senate. The National Treasury is to be held accountable for upholding the schedules, as these mechanisms are a product of consultations and present the views of representatives of the county governments and actual consultations between the Senate and Treasury itself. Third, the National Treasury may consider also incentivizing public financial management at the county level through an incentive-based conditional grant framework as a complement mechanism to other existing checks and balances. Last, sustainable funding requires that counties adopt policies that attract local and international investments, leveraging on counties' competitive edge and re-engineering governance processes, including automating processes alongside collaborative artificial intelligence augmentation. And this we have seen, we saw it in Homa Bay, that when Homa Bay decided to take a different direction and to open the county to investors from Kenya and beyond, we saw exactly what the results were in the media, and you saw it for yourself. So sometimes we have been locking ourselves, but the counties have locked themselves and looked helpless. But then when they open their eyes and look out, there are actually better opportunities for them to do that. When we talk of Treasury incentivizing public finance, we are not saying that they need to give an incentive for people to do the right thing. We are saying the right thing must be done. But what reward do you give somebody who collects more money than another? Because we have seen that locally generated funds have also been dwindling. There are some counties that shocked us as Senate, and these are my own words, not the speakers, that the county councils collected more than the county governments. So you ask yourself what really happened in between, from councillors to MCAs, and things are going down. And we have a structure where we have a governor and we have executive and so forth. So those are some of the things we are saying. Although Treasury must watch and incentivize, we are not saying that they must give an incentive for people to do the right things. They must do the right things to be rewarded. And we are saying when you collect, how much should you retain? How much percentage should be an incentive? Those are some of the discussions that are going on in Senate, which again, consultations with Treasury will be coming forth. In conclusion, distinguished participants, as I conclude, let me reiterate the Senate's commitment and deliberate effort to ensure resources trickle down to the devolved units as was envisaged in the Constitution 2010. I therefore end with the following clarion call. The first one, I call upon all of us to view county governments as potential policy laboratories and centers of innovation. Secondly, while the resourcing of devolved units has increased over the years, achieving the objectives of devolution requires optimum strategic resources complemented by robust accountability and governance mechanisms. Thirdly, political goodwill, collaboration and inclusion, and innovative investments will go a long way in actualizing this. And lastly, it is incumbent upon us all, irrespective of our positions, insignificant as they may seem perceived, whether you are a student or a professor or a participant from wherever or expert, to incessantly protect the interests of the countries and the devolution as a whole. It is not only what is given to Senate, it is to all of us. We must be the devolution champions, all of us. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Professor Margaret Kamar. We had, and you had kindly indulged us. If you could take a seat so that you don't stand for long. She has said it, broken down what Senate does, and, the basket, not to try to summarize because of time. I have 3 minutes. 2 minutes to get very strategic interventions. It could be a question, it could be a comment, very strategic. Very, not what is in Article 96, because that we can read. So the 2 minutes, I'll get questions. AO, if you can help me to move the mic. Where is AO? Or Kevin? That's yours, Prof. And then 1 minute for the senator to respond. So 3 very strategic, interventions to Senator Professor Margaret Kamar, knowing that, she's representing, the Speaker of the Senate. 3. So number 1, the gentleman, and then the lady, and that's it. Thank you. So we can start with the gentleman.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chief Guest, Madam Professor. My name is Gitonga Kinyanjui. I'm a Ward Administrator from Nakuru County. I'm the convener of National Ward Administrators Council. I want to ask the good professor if she knows her ward administrator, either from home or from Nairobi. If she does, she'll answer. Then I want to kindly ask that when the Senate is making laws and policies to the government, they should try and incorporate ward administrators, because they are the people who are where the rubber meets the road. So we can be able to reach more people on the ground and actualize devolution. Thank you very much.
The lady, please.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Irene Otieno with the National Taxpayers Association and also a member of Nairobi Revenue Authority. So my question, Senator, and thanks for your presentation. One is, when I look at how Senate discharges its role, when we say that Senate should be looking at the interest of counties, and it's been very antagonistic in terms of the division of revenue. So my question is, when we talk about the interest of counties and revenue, are we always just looking at what we share between, or can Senate also look more creatively at how much we are losing as a country in terms of illicit financial flows and tax expenditures? So as an institution, we've done reports and we've seen how much, particularly, and I'm happy Treasury is represented, how much we lose as a country, but I think in the language of Treasury is attracting investment. But if we quantify that, the numbers show it's much more than what the 2 levels contest around. So just a question whether there is that interest for us as players to share that research and see that looking at all the years that it's been very antagonistic, can we then, as we continue to push national, to give the fair share of revenue to counties, but also counties help us as a country and citizens to be able to close where we as a country are losing significant revenue. The reason I say that is there had been a circular from Treasury saying counties cannot raise revenue in terms of on-source revenue if it has a negative impact on a sister county. So that, for me, I felt is an attack on the right of a county to raise revenue. So equally, I feel there's an opportunity then for counties to say if the national is ceding some of its revenue rights, that impacts on counties, and therefore within the intergovernmental framework, counties should have a voice through the Senate. So just a bit of guidance whether that is something that Senate can do. My second one and last, if you allow, is as an institution, we've had a project we call Chambua, which has been simplifying the Auditor General reports for all the counties. And what we found out is that local level accountability through the county assembly was not as good because there were county assemblies that had disclaimer reports. What we were told was bad. That means if a county assembly has a negative report, how would it oversight the executive itself to say you have a bad report? So I felt that there is a bit of problem. And so just to reiterate the fact that there needs to be more seriousness on terms of the audit reports, because we have already seen the national level, I'll say quote unquote, is not keen to give the counties the revenue they want. So that means the counties need citizens as their allies. But how would citizens be allies when we are looking at reports that are disclaimers? So for us, it would be, we really don't care where the money goes, because even if we give more to counties, it's getting disclaimers. If it's at national, it's still being misappropriated. So my feeling is that if counties want more resources, then they need to demonstrate through having clean audit reports and redressing the issues there in those reports. Then citizens can also be advocates to support that more money comes at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So there, Prof, you have it. Engagement of the Senate with the ward administrators, the issue of on-source revenue, and I think the leakage and how that constrained investment. The last one, I will also ask Shiro, please note it. The whole thing of the institutional, what do you call it, intricacies or inefficiency of the watcher, the county assembly, and then how the nexus, with the citizen, and then how that can be streamlined. So, Professor?
Thank you very much. The first one came from the ward admin, Gideon? No, sir, sorry. Gitonga. Thank you. I know my ward administrator. I can't remember the name though. But I know him. The reason I know him is because I believe in public participation. And I want to agree with you that ward administrators hold a very important position in this country. They're the ones who organize the public participations at all times. And I have been an encourager that the public should be in public participation. So in my own shopping center, I actually go for public participation when they're discussing things. So yes, it is very important, and it's very important that you be incorporated. The thing is the structure within the executive at that level. Because we are having a problem in the Senate in trying to figure out how accountability, in fact, trickles to the ground. We know that we know the role of the administrator, which is very important because it's the first point for the community to reach the county government. So it's a very important one. And I agree with you. There has to be a way of, we all have to think around it to see how that recognition can bring in accountability. Because what we are looking for is that accountability, but more than anything, your role in meeting the community, accounting to the community, answering all those questions will mean that all CECs must actually give you enough information to be able to answer questions in your ward. So it is a very important structure within the governance of a county government. Irene, you have given a number of questions. Where is the role of Senate in this, in the issue of illicit flows? As I said, Senate's main business in oversight is chasing that money that has left after the division of revenue that has been distributed to the counties, and we follow it down to the ground. So yes, we are there. We've had a lot of challenges, and you have actually mentioned one of them even through the Chambua program that you have, where you are looking at the oversight that is being done by MCS. Judy will tell you that there has been very high variability on how the MCS behave. Your MCS are the darlings of the governor, and there's no oversight. In some cases, where they are doing a lot of good accountability, excitement sends the MCS to impeach the governor. So you tell yourself, we have two extremes. We have the impeachment team. Whenever you don't agree with your governor, and in Senate we are saying, Senator, go home and discourage this relationship between the governor and the MCS. But I think maybe the way we are telling them, we are not telling them that the county also is yours, that we all belong here and we are going nowhere. And so we must be able to be accountable, but also make it work at that level. So we have these two very strong dynamics that are going on. But in Senate, we are still working on it. You have said we'll be very fair when it comes to impeachment. Bring the people for impeachment, we will tell you. We'll work, we'll sort them out, throw whoever must be thrown out, and we retain whatever must be. But accountability by MCS is what now we are grappling with. We must get the MCS to account to the public, not to the governor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's appreciate Senator Professor Margaret Kamar. And we have a gift for you. So if you can, please, for the photograph, please come here, and I'll ask Dr. Rugo to present it to you. Token of appreciation. We've read the laws of Kenya, and it does not compromise your integrity as a state officer. Yeah, it is within the value. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Asante-san. And so, Professor, she had requested, because she needs to preside over the House, so you have our blessings, and thank you very much. We continue with the conversation. So this is the moment we've been waiting for, so that we have the conversation. Allow me to recognize Mr. Roble, my friend from CRA. He joined us. As I hand over this to Dr. Rugo. So I will ask, Wanjiro Gikonyo, please come and sit over here. Judy, please come. Chairman, please come over to the stage. Whichever route is quicker to you. Mr. Kimani, Mr. Kipturus, and Roble. And we have tried not to have a manel, so this is the conversation. Free sitting, yeah. Are the seats enough? So Dr. Rugo, take it away.
Good. As I go to my seat, first of all, we want to really appreciate. This is a big panel, but I must confess it is half the people we would have loved to be on this panel. As you know, this is always difficult, how best to balance. But we are here for a conversation. Each of the people here represents a very unique space. And as I've said, if you look through again, you would ask, but that other constituency, why are they not here? What are the other constituency? We realize we can only have so much. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask each of you, and because time always does that thing, as Kenyans say, to take about the first 3 minutes, just to explain from where you sit. We had asked you from the National Treasury, where we will start with Mr. Samuel Kiptorus. What are some of the issues you're observing? You know, and if we can just keep it to 3 minutes first, and then I will come to the floor, please, for interventions. Then we'll come back because we want this to be a dialogue, as opposed to your standard where everybody presents and then when you are done, we ask nani mwingine ako na swali. So please be preparing. So. And for that, you'll also allow me not to do something that I thought I would do, which is to read your detailed profiles. All of you are very distinguished in many ways in your different spaces, in the public service, in the civil society, in the different worlds. So I'll start with you, Mr. Kiptorus, who is the director, Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations at the National Treasury, and then we'll come to Mr. Roble, who is the Director of Fiscal Affairs at CRA. Then Wanjiru Gekonyo requires no introduction. She's now an active citizen and doing the Lord's work, but has been a very core voice. I say that because for as long as I've been in this space, she has been there. She's the person actually who is behind a lot of the social audit work we talk about. Initially, it was called the CDF audit, accountability project. Judy Oduma, who is right here before I come to the other two gentlemen, again has basically been around the clock, including serving outside the country. You know, and now currently the team lead of the Kenya Devolution Program at ACT. Then we have my good friend Joseph Kimani. Joseph Kimani, again, has been around the block, has worked a lot with youth, you know, and then later on worked at NDI and currently at the Royal Danish Embassy as a program manager for democratic governance and therefore devolution. And he's also the co-chair for the Devolution Donor Working Group, as it were. And last and not least, Mr. Kirago Githinji, who is current chair of the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee. This is the backbone or the central nerve of IBEC and the summit. In fact, there was a whole law on intergovernmental relations, and therefore. So I will start in that order. I will ask you to make your intro. So we'll start with Mr. Kiptorus, then we'll come to CRA, the role you play and how you see it. Then I'll come to Wanjiru, then I'll come to Bona Kirago, and then Kimani, and then Judy. If you can keep it to 3 minutes, that will be amazing. And the mics are just next to you. Thanks. And just to keep this conversational, please sit down. I'm also coming to sit right away.
Thank you so much, the organizers of this forum. I'm glad to be here. My name is Samuel Kiptorus. I have been told I'm a director in the Governmental Fiscal Relations. I am representing my principal secretary, Dr. Chris Kipto, who was unable to come due to other duties. I'm a career civil servant. I have been in the service across all arms of government for the last 31 years. I understand government operations in and out. I have a long speech from my principal secretary. I have already shared the speech. I will not, at the risk of being disciplined, I will not read through it. But I will point out the key issues that will engage us in this conversation. From the title, you look at financing devolution in Kenya. Ask yourself, what are the components of devolution? What are the components of devolution? You are just looking at from the National Treasury point of view. We are looking at the revenue. You're looking at own source. You're looking at whatever the shareable that we give you every year. But if you look at what is the source of this revenue, how is the performance of KRA in this collection? Isn't it? Are we able to borrow any more? Isn't it? Are we getting any additional allocation? So those are some of the things. As you point fingers at the National Treasury, you also need to look at the source. Where does this money come from? And I don't want, again, if you look at the counties, there is the county assembly and the county executive. I'll look at them in terms of capacity. And over the last 10 years, what has been happening? There's been high turnover. If you look at in terms of fiscal responsibility, for example, we have talked about the wage bill. But look at the development. Also look at the systems. We're looking at leakages. You're looking at systems. How are our systems performing? From the National Treasury point of view, we are given under Section 12E to develop systems. Do we have adequate systems in place? Let's look at the other components of devolution. Let's look at urban areas and cities. Is anybody talking about urban areas and cities? They are in counties. How is their funding? If you look at beyond just borrowing under the normal borrowing from National Treasury, borrowing on behalf, look at Section 38 of PFM Act, which allows counties to engage directly to get grants. Are we exploiting that frontier? Look at public-private partnership. Are we exploiting that? It is not there. We're just looking at the traditional funding. I'll now go to, as a scholar, without looking at, if you just look at Kenya, how is South Africa performing, for example? How is Nigeria performing? If you look at established devolutions, what are the lessons learned? What can we learn from them? Those are some of the things that I want you to bring up. There was also something on public participation. There's been a lot of hype on public participation. I know there is a public participation bill, but how structured is it? How structured is it? Those are some of the things that should be coming out from you as from academia. Look at our planning. We do very good planning. We do very good planning. Do we execute these plans? Now, the last one that I know many people don't want to touch on is public procurement. Procurement. Where does these resources go? How is the procurement? And I want to pause there so that we can engage more in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. CRA, you have been at the center of this from literally the three formulas, including the current one that we are on, and the revision that is going on. You have given your advisory every year in December. It's always a Christmas gift, if not a New Year one, on how we should divide resources on the. What are your observations? What are you reading from where you sit? Roble, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. My name is CPA Roble Nuno, Director of Fiscal Affairs, Commission on Revenue Allocation. Our mandate, by the way, is we are a constitution created in the Constitution under Article 215. Our mandate is under 216, which is sharing of revenue between the national and the county government, and horizontally between the 47 county governments. Other mandates of the Commission is financing of financial management by county government. In this end, we normally make recommendations on the county recurrent budget expenditure ceilings so that the county assembly and the county executive do not fight on how much it goes to the county assembly. So we make recommendation to the Senate, and the Senate has, the Honorable Prof has indicated that whatever they approve, all come as recommendation from the Commission. Of course, the revenue sharing bill and everything, we prepare it professionally based on parameters that exist. But when it goes to the assembly and we make our recommendation based on finding and analysis, then it takes a political angle. Then it becomes a political document. Then the process turns political. Then that's why you hear we have no money to give you. In actual sense, in the Commission, we believe there's no one's money. the money we are sharing is actually revenues collected from Kenyans raised nationally. That's what is being shared. The other thing under the Article 216.3b, we define and enhance on-source revenue and promote fiscal responsibility in both levels of government. We have concentrated much on enhancing and defining on-source revenue at the county level because the national government had already existing structures. And as devolution is its teenage stage, we have concentrated on supporting counties. On fiscal responsibility, of course, we have mandate under the PFM Act to review the county fiscal strategy papers developed by county government. In the review, we check the implementation of the fiscal responsibility measures as enshrined, principles as enshrined in the PFM Act. What have we done to support the counties is that we have capacity built most of the counties by, for example, the county assemblies developing model laws to enable the county governments to collect on-source revenue. The other thing is that we conceptualized a way to promote fiscal responsibility by coming with something called CCI, County Creditworthiness Initiative, for the purposes of the county government, accessing alternative financing from the markets. And you can only access that and be creditworthy if you meet the parameters or the principles of fiscal responsibility as enshrined in the PFM. For example, you must tick the box of 30% at least for development, 35% for the purposes of wage bill, fiscal risks addressed very well, debts management in the county, and pending bills, how you are addressing your pending bills. From the commission perspective, pending bills are there, but if you are operating on a balanced budget and you are strictly adhering to the PFM, you know that pending bills for the previous year will be the first charge in the following year. And as a prudent accountant, you need to forecast by 1st January, 30th December or January, you are focused on OSR collection such that you address and shelve some projects that you think that cannot be implemented or financed within your OSR. Can I stop there, Daktari?
Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And as I start, just to pick up on what Professor Kamar said, as she was recognizing Madam Judy, that those who fight for devolution are continuing the fight. And indeed, it's a fight because devolution in this country has been killed by the national government since independence. We must remember this is the context in which we are here discussing the struggle for devolution. And this struggle continues as we push for effective devolution and even convince our county governments to implement devolution faithfully, because many of them, majority, are not, and convince the Senate to act in the interest of devolution and the citizen, not in the interest of the next election when they must run for the seat. So this is a fight, and we've all been called to be champions across the board. So that's my opener. And then to say that when we started this work, we were reminded to always start with principles to ensure we are on the same page so that we continue to educate ourselves. We've then now gotten into the habit of talking about money, and maybe we don't agree on the foundations, and I don't have much time, but the devolution policy that was never adopted, the original one, because the policy we have now is not really a policy on devolution, talked about for devolution to be effective, you needed effective political parties, ethics and values, effective development planning, skilled human resource, and sustainable funding. So as long as we don't have those, we are going to continue to grapple. So as we look at a way forward, we have to go back to those, remembering all of those underscored by effective public participation. They don't stand alone, they move together. So my reflection is going back to policy. We are talking about a context when we don't have an effective devolution policy. And some of the things that were initially anticipated did not make it into the legal framework. For instance, we were supposed to have a Loans and Grants Council to have an intergovernmental mechanism for financing, for borrowing, especially the borrowing aspect. And it would also manage the grants, because now we have a lot of conditional grants. We've got, of course, a lot of borrowing. We have seen that debt management has actually undermined devolution by closing the fiscal space, because we forgot about that intergovernmental mechanism that would also be administered through a shared treasury. Not treasury as an agent or an institution that is really working for the national executive, but as an institution that works for both levels of government. Also, they had recommended that the national revenue body be a shared body that could serve all the counties. So if we go back to where the rain started beating us, is because we have not set up the intergovernmental mechanisms to manage this function cost effectively. Right now we are at war, and then every county is setting up a revenue authority. I sit on the Nairobi one, but there is no money to run it, and it's additional cost of government. So maybe we need to go back to that. There are other intergovernmental structures in the County Government Act that have not been operationalized. There is 91F, where the governor is supposed to sit with the senator and the MCAs and the member of National Assembly to have a political discussion at the county level. Never happens. We also have an intergovernmental body at the service delivery under section 50-something of the County Government Act. A few counties have it, but not in a strong way. So the same way our colleague there is saying that ward administrators are not really recognized, and it is true. Some of them do a terrible job. They become part of the corruption cartels. Some of them do an exemplary job, but they are struggling to be recognized because county governments have also not decentralized. We are operating in a situation where decentralization took place at the county government. So let us revisit our intentions for intergovernmental mechanisms, because without those, we cannot succeed. Maybe one last point. As a member of the county revenue authority, we get a lot of information. Actually, we don't get it. We have to find it. And it's very complicated. And it is numerous, many documents, so many revenue streams. When I was preparing for this, I went back to the revenue policy. We've got, in terms of tax policies, we've got a 2019 policy. We then also have an intended policy by the national government. So again, even on the tax level, there is a fight about which policy will govern us. An Adam Smith report talked about, and I believe the CRA also mirrored this in their policy, even though it hasn't been implemented, we need to simplify the number of revenue streams we are purporting to collect from the county revenue, because many of them are not effective. They are not cost effective. They will not meet the standards of tax justice. So Adam Smith talked about recognizing the principles of taxation, equity versus social services versus tax justice. This is one of the standards when you decide, are we going for that revenue? Market failure. Does this revenue, does this service charge, is it important because without it we are going to have market failure? Is this a part of development and regulation, or is it a revenue stream for revenue generation? And then very importantly, what are the impacts of this revenue stream or service charge vis-a-vis the benefits to the public, the economic cost, and the welfare impacts? Right now we are doing, I don't know whether it's juju or guesswork, in even this 35% on salaries and wage bill. This is not a verified figure. So let's get the expertise. Let us do ourselves a justice by getting sound principles and using data standards that can help us curb the political pressures around tax and revenue generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one of the things that will come back to Roble later is that CRA did a report 2 years ago, if I'm not wrong, that basically tried to show the capacity, the revenue capacity for counties. It will be interesting to reflect on that. But from where Wanjiru has stopped, Wanjiru has mentioned intergovernmental, I think, more times than I can remember. And therefore, allow me then to just turn to the chairman himself of the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee, and allow me to also appreciate the presence of Farah Malim. He's in the room, so he will participate at some point. Kindly, Bwana Kirago.
Thank you very much. I thank Intergovernmental International Budget Partnership of Kenya and the Policy Institute here, because a number of decades ago, I spent 2 years in Strathmore College, not university then, and it inspired me even to start a college of my own in my home country. So I'm happy to be here. Congrats. I would just, from the point of intergovernmental relations, but first of all, make one very fundamental point. It was made by the others in a sense, but also very strongly made in the statement by Professor Kamar, Senator Kamar. Devolution is here to stay because, unlike the devolution of 1963 under the 1963 Constitution, this devolution, for you to move it out, you need to work for another 20, 30 years. The way we work to get devolution now, under the current constitution, you need a referendum to win a referendum to remove it. And whatever its shortcomings at the moment, devolution is not going away. Therefore, for this country, we don't have an option but to get this system of devolved governance to work. And that is a statement I make in every forum I go. The best way for Kenya, the only way Kenya is actually going to be able to move rapidly in socioeconomic transformation is by getting devolution work. Because the essential functions for the socioeconomic transformation of this country, they are devolved. Agriculture is devolved, health is devolved, education is also significantly devolved, water is devolved. When that system is not working, none of those functions are delivered optimally to the people of Kenya. And therefore, Kenya cannot get to the trajectory of rapid socioeconomic transformation. Having said that, on the other hand, I'm one of those Kenyans, because of my previous work when I looked at public financing and so forth, I just am amused as Kenyans complain how they are overtaxed. But they don't complain about the level of services that they demand or have promised and happily welcomed from their successive governments. This is a country which is trying to offer free education system. This is a country which is promising all Kenyans good water delivery at affordable level. This is a country which is trying to offer universal health care. Therefore, we aspire as Kenyans, or at least our political leaders have led us to believe we are here to create a welfare state. The welfare state models that really operate well, as you all know, are in Northern Europe, Denmark, Scandinavia countries. In those countries, and to an extent even France, for example, and Britain and so on, in all those countries, the government taxation is at least 30% of the GDP. In Kenya at the moment, we are doing only 14%. And therefore, there is a structural problem in the state we are trying to create and the system by which we will get to that state. Madam Professor Kamar said that when devolution came, in the end we forgot everything about it other than the political economy around it in terms of the struggle for resources. And that is the current situation at the moment. We don't discuss devolution outside the context of the struggle for sharing the resources which they are there. And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate. That is appropriate. The only thing we need to realize that part of the reason why this struggle is very intense is because we are trying to share very inadequate resources. And I'm not saying the resources cannot be better. We can mobilize better, because there are times in the past when in this country government collected 20+% of the GDP. As I've indicated, now it is 14%. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that the problem? And again, I will say, in terms of the studies I've been involved in terms of political economy of taxation, the critical thing for any government to fund its programs is what is called a fiscal contract. Without a fiscal contract, governments will not usually mobilize enough resources in collecting the tax. And in that context, let me say, therefore, both the national government and the county governments have a long way to go in closing the gap in the getting to a place where they have a fiscal contract with the people. They need the trust of the population in terms of what they are going to do, if it is own source revenue in the county governments. If the people actually know that you are going to use that money well, it may not happen in a day, but they will be able to do it. Because in any case, when you don't do it, during these fronts, we have had people in villages organizing themselves to tax each other so that they have money to repair their road. That happens. They would be happy that an organized government was the one collecting the money they are collecting in the village to repair their road. But because they are not sure that the government would do it, therefore that money which they have collected in the village, they are not willing to give it to the county government. That is the context. And therefore, we need to urge our national and the county governments to really strive to have a fiscal contract with their citizens. It is based on trust. And the lack of trust between the citizens and the government is part of our problem. But the second level of trust is, of course, there also between the national government and the county government. The Constitution is very good in terms of creating the structures for intergovernmental relations and even for creating that trust. That is why, under the Constitution, it is clear that the two levels of government have to work in consultation, in cooperation, and coordination. They are interdependent, they are distinct, but they are also interdependent. For them to work interdependently when they are distinct, they need trust between the two levels. They need transparency, openness between the two levels. And for a long time, for the 10 years, we had that trust deficit between the county and the national governments. And part of the problem there is that actually, again, we don't go to the spirit of Article 189 when we look at how the two levels of government need to work together in cooperation, in consultation, in cooperation, and so forth. We don't have, in that case, we haven't operationalized the institutions which have been created effectively. For a long time, the summit, which is where the governors meet with His Excellency the President to create the national agenda, there have been forum for crisis management, to talk to each other, not to really plan for each other. Because in the ideal situation, as far as I'm concerned, the summit should be a place where the national vision is shared, the national policy strategic agenda is shared, and so forth. But for a long time, in the 10 years of devolution, that did not happen. And that created a problem. And then at the sector level, where functions are devolved, you don't get the situation which is really envisaged in the Constitution, that in making policy, in agreeing policy targets for a sector, because we should agree where we want Kenya's agriculture to go, where we want Kenya's health to go, where we want the water system to go. We should have all the stakeholders, including representatives of the citizens in terms of civil society and so on, and agree these are the targets of the country in this sector. And that, therefore, the national government policy should be made with a strategy which reflects what we have agreed. These are the resources that we are going to share, and that for the county governments to help us to deliver, because agriculture is devolved. This is what we expect of the county governments. This is what we expect of the national government. Yes, we have shortage of resources. How do we share these limited resources to get our agricultural sector to get where it wants to go? Those are really the issues which we haven't had occasion to look at the moment. Therefore, we are in this system together. As I would say, I would very much embrace what Madame Gekonyo has said. You know, let's get the system to work, because the institutional framework is there. It is not operating at the moment. But without it working, Kenya will never perform, Kenya's public sector will never perform optimally to the people of Kenya. There is opportunity for both levels to raise much more resources, but only if they can earn the trust of Kenyans, and only therefore if there is a fiscal contract between the Kenyan people and each of the two levels of government. I think I'll stop there. I could say more, but I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kimani, you have been part of supporting this work through the Royal Danish Embassy, but you also have been a very key player in this space. What are your observations? Particularly, yes, the challenges are clear, they are being defined, but what are some of the opportunities you're seeing? But also your observation, 3 minutes, and then, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So it's a pleasure being here today. My notebook is almost getting full. The discussions have been very rich. I'm taking very copious notes. First of all is to commend IBP and Strathmore for this partnership. I couldn't help but notice this motto, developing great African leaders, that the Public Policy and Governance Institute, because it is these great African leaders who will actually make devolution work. So congratulations for that partnership. Having said that, I'm wearing two hats today, representing my embassy, the Royal Danish Embassy, but also the Devolution Donor Working Group. We have the distinct pleasure and privilege of co-chairing the Devolution Donor Working Group with the World Bank and also with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. So as I speak, I'll also be wearing that hat. First point to make is, first of all, recognition that in terms of funding, most of the money is funded by the taxpayer. Donor funding only complements part of the critical areas that have not been covered. So it's very, very important for us to acknowledge that donor funding only complements what the Kenyan taxpayer has put in. But donor funding is only able to be effective if we follow the principles of development effectiveness. And those are the ones that I shall very quickly run through. Ownership. Whenever we are thinking about what we should support in Kenya in terms of devolution, we must reflect on ownership, because the only way it's going to work is if the local communities own the agenda. So we are obliged to make sure that we engage in very exhaustive consultation with the people before we consider any support. That's the first thing, ownership. It has to be owned at the grassroots. The second element is harmonization. There are excellent development programs that are in place. For instance, here in Kenya, we have Vision 2030. So whatever support that comes in from the donor community must be cognizant of the plans that have been put in place. Senator Kamar mentioned the county integrated development plans. So those ones are already in place. So whatever comes in needs to be harmonized with the plans that have already been put in place by the citizens. The third element is alignment. and that is a close cousin to harmonization. But alignment is not just based on local development programs, but it is also based on larger endeavors like the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure the audience here, you're aware that we only have a very short 7 years to 2030, by which time we are talking about the attainment of the SDGs. I doubt whether we shall be able to achieve most of them. Indeed, we are doing pretty poorly globally, but the alignment agenda also includes the global agenda. The other element is management for results. This money, the donor money, of course, comes from taxpayers from those various countries. So it is essential that there is value for money that goes to the taxpayers. Indeed, I can tell you that every year we have to report back to the capitals. The respective parliaments have to respond to the question, what is the money that their taxpayers have put in? What is it doing in Kenya? What is it doing in Uganda, etc., etc.? So we are constantly engaged in tracking results. So when it comes to financing, we really have to make sure that the promise is kept. So results, results, results. And finally, mutual accountability. And let me see by the audience here, who hates corruption? Just by a show of hands. Very good. You must not only hate, but you must absolutely hate corruption. That is the only way that it's going to work, because, and it has been mentioned by some speakers, by many of the speakers here, that without integrity, all the resources, financial and non-financial, are not going to work. So that is something that we are very, very focused on. And finally, Dr. Ugo, what can be improved? More consultation. I have to admit that coordination is something that can always be improved, even amongst the donor community. And from a broader perspective, there is what we call the Devolution Sector Working Group. GK is centrally involved in that, coordinating the devolution family. The second one is enhanced integrity. I've talked about that, and rule of law. Those are essential elements. The other one, which I'm delighted that Senator Kamar mentioned, is efficient transfer of funds. Indeed, this is of intense concern for the donor community, because conditional grants are only able to get to the counties through a certain process. And unfortunately, that process becomes protracted, and what ends up happening is funds end up getting delayed, so that donors avail money, but that money gets delayed. It does not get to the ground as efficiently and as fast as we would love to. The other element is more participation by the private sector. The private sector is involved in devolution, but you'll agree with me that when you think devolution, private sector is not the first thing that comes to mind. So it is important that we engage private sector much, much more as actors in terms of availing resources. And I've said resources, not necessarily finances, because resources, of course, go beyond funds. And finally, it is really an adjustment of the mind. A recognition that we've only implemented devolution for 10 years. 10 years in the larger scheme of things is a drop in the ocean. When you look at other countries that have implemented subnational governance, the United States, Nigeria, South Africa, who have been at it much longer, the challenges that you're talking about are also there. So we must not beat ourselves up too much. Yes, there are problems which we must handle, but at the same time, we must also pat ourselves on the back and recognize the achievements that you have made, all things considered, within these 10 years. And it's not to diminish the problems that are there. But once we liberate our minds and say, yes, we are doing well, but we can do better, I am sure that we'll be able to move ahead much better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimani. Judy, last but not least, and once Judy makes her intervention, I will come to the audience. Then I'll come back to them again, and I'll give time, particularly even to our colleagues from Treasury and CRA, to point out some of the things they have heard, because they are really involved at the very center of things. Judy, over to you.
Thank you, Abraham. Judy Oduma is my name, from Act Change Transform, which is implementing the Kenya Devolution Program. I am working there as a team leader for the Kenya Devolution Program, and I'm happy my colleagues are here. I hope you're interacting with them, maybe now or even later. Maybe as Prof spoke about my journey, It is true, I've been a nomad, but in devolution and decentralization. So I must say, I will continue championing for decentralization. And devolution, for sure, is here to stay. Prof. Dr. Githinji, it's good to hear this coming from you, from IGRTC. Devolution is here to stay. But I think I would like to speak to maybe 2-3 things. Maybe first to start with what we are doing. Interacting with government, with the private sector, with the CSOs. If you walked out here, I am sure most of us have attended the Devolution conference. Most of us have attended the summit, IBEC, participating, and talk about devolution at the national level in Nairobi. When you go down to the citizens, and we just conducted a citizen survey and launched a Devolution at 10 survey done purely by the CSOs. They have a different story. And it speaks to exactly what the director at this school spoke about and what Professor Kamar spoke about. That they feel we can do more. 100% has been sent, but they feel it's only 20% that they can feel at the county level. So that speaks a lot to accountability issues. But going back on the issue of intergovernmental relations, I think that's what really is trending, Dr. And we cannot speak about devolution and smooth implementation if we don't address issues of inter- and intra-governmental relations. One, specifically to the transfer of funds, the allocations. In fact, we are speaking about shareable revenue, not that it is money coming from the national to the county. At the moment the Treasury starts dismantling the fact that we are speaking about devolution, I think we still have the same issue about delays in disbursement. I remember when I was at COG, we always used to go to court. Why are we having delays? And I'm happy to see you, Honorable Farah, because we were in this journey together. Why should we continuously have delays? And yet you know it's a constitutional provision that we must have these funds go down in good time. And therefore, that's why we have pending bills. We have citizens crying that we have not been paid. We don't have economics invigorated because we cannot do that if we don't have the money. Money has to circulate for us to actually realize this change. It has to circulate so that we can start building on the economies of our counties for it to generate revenue, and therefore we can start talking about on-source revenue generation that's actually enhanced. So it has a ripple effect. Number two, when we have the planning and prioritization at the county level, we cannot see this happening fully across or around the year, seeing the back and forth between the executive assembly. Remember, in fact, prominence is given to the county assemblies. There shall be a county assembly and the executive, but we have forgotten, the county assemblies have forgotten that they have the power to oversight over the executive. And therefore, the push and pull, especially when it comes to the budgeting, is always there, causing delays. Somebody told me the other day that they can think best and approve best when they're at the low sea level. Maybe they have to go to Mombasa so they can approve and so on and so forth. Why should this happen? We are working in entities with structures. We have the amenities. We have facilitation at that level. Why can't we have the cycle go smoothly? And somebody spoke about maybe a little bit the reality of clawback. We are seeing, and I'm happy IGRTC is here, it is now that we're finalizing the costing and transfer of functions. Who is going to ensure that we monitor implementation of some of these functions that we are actually transferring this time around? So that is one. We also have intergovernmental relation structures. How effective are our intergovernmental relations sector forums? Agriculture, education, trade, health. To the extent that we can have a strike go on for 6 weeks, 7, 8 weeks, we must begin to convene. We must begin to deliberate. We must bring our heads together to see to it that we address the issue of intergovernmental relations. That's one. Number two, I would like to speak about accountability. Joseph, everybody hates corruption. We must also begin to start saying, I must deal with it from a personal level so that it spreads across. And I would like to tie this with the oversight role of the Senate and the county assemblies, but more so for county assemblies, because the Speaker, Representative Professor Kamar, spoke about the perspective from the Senate. Remember, in 2013, if you read the Elections Act, there was a provision on the education qualifications for the members of county assembly. That was packed, and it was said to be revisited after 10 years, with the hope that everybody will have gone to school so that we can bring up the qualification levels of the members of county assembly. In 2022, early, we had to throw it away. We had to pack it again. We said, let's conduct a survey and see, is this necessary? And we went around and said, no. If you, Professor, or Mheshimiwa Farah here, with your master's, with your PhD, run with me who has a certificate or a class 8 degree certificate, and I beat you to the game, then it means that I'm a leader, that I have the qualities that the people have seen, that I can lead. But you're forgetting that we have a revised mandate for the, I would call them accountability institutions, because the county assemblies are institutions where we must have oversight and accountability. And therefore it means we must interrogate the plans, we must interrogate these budgets, meaning I must have some kind of level to be able to call myself a legislator. CRO has provided county assembly with members, 3 members of staff, but categorically stated it can be a driver, it can be a cleaner, and one can be a bodyguard or something. Why are we forgetting that these can actually be secretariats that provide guidance to have legislation that is of quality, oversight that is of quality? It is the same. I think historically, the National Assembly is guided by very strong secretariats, the Senate, and I think I've seen a few members of the Senate here, who then advises, if I have come here as a farmer, and I am supposed to be a legislator, and I take oversight, draw or draft good legislation. That's why we have discussions around the quality of legislation. We must address that. 2, okay, I'll speak to that and then I'll finish. When we have county assemblies about stability in the counties, and of course you still have to be loyal to a political party, what happens? Your loyalty is to the political party. Does it stabilize? Does it make it stable? Does it make it objective for us to conduct oversight? 3, the autonomy of county assemblies. How can it be that I must come to the executive to get my finances and you expect that I oversight you? We must speak about the autonomy of county assemblies, independence. And lastly, non-compliance to norms and standards, to laws. I think Kiptoru spoke about PFM laws, procurement laws. We all keep flouting these laws. At the end of the day, nobody holds us to account. Who will do that for us to be able to have strong institutions? Thank you. For now. I think I can speak until tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Of course, it's getting hot when I'm looking at the clock and wondering where does time run to. But allow me, with the help of GK, just to go around comments, questions, input. We are all not here not just to hear. We also have perspectives. And then I will do one last on the panel, and I'll be asking them to respond to some of the issues they have had. Each of you has had issues, particularly even the National Treasury, issues around disbursements, issues about the role of the National Treasury. But let's hear comments. We'll start with that row, the gentleman with the green biro. And then, yes, then we come to this row, then we come to this row, then we come to this row. If you can keep your intervention to just one, we'll appreciate. Please.
So number one, who come to you? Then number 2 and 3. And 4. Okay.
Please.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. My name is Abdi Aziz. I used to work with the county. I was a pioneer CEC, and now I work with an NGO called ASAL Plus. I tend to agree with a few issues that were mentioned, although I came late. On a few issues that I wanted to mention, is devolution working? If we answer that question, yes, it's working. Because for some of the parts of Kenya, when devolution started, in fact, the 2010 constitution has really been an equalizer for some of the counties, maybe in the northern part of Kenya. We never had even a single kilometer of tarmac. Today we can talk about kilometers of tarmac. Our ladies were dying. Our maternal mortality rate was very high. Now it is reduced due to devolution. And then, are there problems? Yes, there are problems. And who is causing the problem? And some of the causes of the problems are seated in this room. For example, the devolution donor working group. They are doing a good job. They're investing in devolution activities, but doing it blindly. They're investing blindly without public participation. So I will have encouraged them to do proper public participation, do baseline surveys every year. For example, I come from a county called Mandera. The outgoing group and this is to CRA, the outgoing group declared a zero bending bill. And the governor today is paying 5.8 billion bending bills. And CRA, the controller of budget, are just busy dishing out that money. And it's going to people's pocket probably. That is from the non-governmental, from the eyes of the non-governmental, that is. And
please keep it to that so that we give other people a chance.
Okay, okay. And then I will have also suggested, as an experienced person in that sector, I will have suggested also intergovernmental and the Council of Governors to put their house in order, a bit of sibling rivalry that is causing problems in the devolution platform. Then, I will have also suggested at least an oversight. Now that we have independent IPOA, policing authority, and police nowadays, their problem is even less. Killings have reduced. But there is serious killing called corruption in the counties. Something, at least an institution has to come up that should oversight the control of budget that is just giving out money and the other authorities so that there is accountability for the money that goes to the counties. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll request the others to just keep it to about 45 seconds, kindly, so that we give more people a chance.
Thanks, Doc. The directive comes at a point where I actually curated, we said I should keep it to one question, but I'm going to ask you for permission to allow me ask one question for each one of them because they're important, please. But I'll try to keep it to the bare minimum. First, thank you to IBP Kenya for, I've heard you doing a short executive course on devolution and PFM. It's too late. It ought to have come earlier, but I'm very glad that we're actually getting there. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Henry Paul Gichana is my name. I lead Katiba Institute's devolution work. Now, to the Treasury, I'm very curious. I mean, when Njoroge Konyo mentioned something about the original devolution policy having a vision for a shared national treasury, and that is the basis for my question to Kipkoros from the Treasury, consistently the problem has always been with the Treasury, including the disbursements. And a central question which also was raised by Dr. at the beginning was the question of the handling of public debt, the handling of national interest. I know there was a standoff between the Council of Governors and the Treasury at some point, which was mediated by the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, found its way to the High Court, and the High Court made very clear pronouncements on how the vertical division of revenue ought to be done. But we consistently see the National Treasury undertaking what we call top slicing, assigning itself funds under, public debt, national interest, national government obligations, way before they actually undertake the vertical division of revenue. Why is this an important strategy for the Treasury to consistently go against even what the court has said and what has been agreed intergovernmentally? For the Commission on Revenue Allocation,
I will only give you one question to one person, kindly.
Okay.
Yeah. So pick your best.
All right. Okay, I'll just mention something about, let me just speak to the Commission on Revenue Allocation then in that case. With respect to your basis for the horizontal sharing of revenue, we saw you did the first basis, right, which was very generic. The parameters were very generic, and they were in line with the constitutional goal for ensuring that counties have autonomy insofar as expenditure and budgeting is concerned. You did the same for the second basis. When it came to the third basis, you added two parameters in that particular basis, health and agriculture, which are very expenditure specific, which means that out of all the many functions the counties actually undertake, you selected two and prioritized them for allocating funds to them, which leads to predetermination in terms of county expenditure. And I'm just curious now that we are working on a fourth basis, whether we are moving towards predetermination or whether we are going back to high-level parameters for revenue sharing.
Thank you, Geshana. Thank you. Allow us to keep it there. The lady.
Okay, thank you for the presentations. My name's Christine Juray. I'm a grants, partnerships, and contracts consultant. I also do capacity building for organizations and institutional development. I have about 18 years in working in grants management, the last assignment being Open Society Foundations. Now, just straight to CRA, just to mention that in 2018, we almost got into working modality with CRA, but they were constrained by human resources to run a program that we had a mutual interest in. The program was a demarginalization lab. It's unfortunate that institutions may lack capacity to take in resources, and maybe it's because of the way they are set up. So maybe that is something that also needs to be looked into when civil society wants to support government and semi-autonomous institutions, and they're not able to take in that. It's unfortunate, again, from all the discussions here, that one of the things we've got to deal with are politics and illicit flows in resource management. I think that's a mindset that needs to change in Kenya especially, no matter how long we sit here. But the good thing is that we have champions of change here, and we can find a way forward on mitigating or managing this. Education is also a key factor in changing mindsets, and we really applaud Strathmore Business School and the university at large for really entrenching education in tackling matters that were never thought to be really can be managed through education. So my question now then comes that who are the champions of change that can be worked with going forward after this? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who are the champions of change? Let's come to this row. This row, I didn't see any hand. Okay, so after that, I'll give Farah some intervention, and then I come back to the panel.
Thank you for the opportunity and for organizing such platform. My name is Halim Ali. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I will say I have worked with almost all 47 counties by virtue of being a legal advisor to a financing institution that finances county. And by extension, I've also interacted with the donors. So my observation from issue of devolution One, thank you for giving us the baseline in terms of the principles of devolution, even though we have not yet embraced as they are supposed to be embraced. But in implementation of devolution, there are teething problems. There are points where we stand and we say, okay, how do we go about this implementation of these roles? I would say a good example is the issue of accountability. Where there is responsibility, we agree there has to be accountability. The biggest problem for many counties is the issue of capacity. A good example will be the ASAL counties. ASAL counties, you will of course disburse funds and they will not be able to either implement, absorb that fund, or even where there is absorption, there's going to be mismanagement. What I have seen is, it's the point where the donors and the national government stands and says, okay, any county that has audit issue, we will not be financing. It now becomes conditional precedent for the next disbursement. The point of reflection will be, how do we balance the principles of equity and accountability? Because this is the point we are saying, you rather be thirsty, we will not provide water because you're not able to account for water, for the money that we disburse. There is conflict of the principles of human rights, and I invite Henry Paul Gishana, who used to be my classmate. I am happy that the Member of Parliament, Honorable Farah Maalim, is here, and I'm happy that the donor representative here is here. We have to now reflect on how to balance the aspect of accountability and equity. These counties do not have capacity. These are people who have just benefited from education, yet they have the right to be given this money. Do we now say we will not give you anymore? The second issue is that you're going to see a lot of bills. And these bills, just as we are having this point of reflection, the national entities, some of them have reflected and said, you know what, even those institutions that were supposed to be temporary, I'll give you a good example in the water sector, they are now turning themselves into permanent institutions so that they continue with county roles, simply because of these teething issues. So the question is, for us to continue with the issue of devolution, do we say, now that we have experienced this problem, we shun devolution away through legislative means? Because the acts of parliament that are coming up, they are taking county roles. And they are taking it in the name of, somehow, if you look at it objectively, it's almost genuine, because you will give a county government donor money and they will not account for it completely.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very...
There's one more.
One more?
As much, I'm just my handler. And we
please, let's
keep it.
Do we give him or the guy on this row? Okay, I'll also give you, sir. But please, keep it now 30 seconds. I must.
Okay. So thank you so much. My name is Sengeli Brian. I work with the Center for Minority Rights Development. And when you look at the objects of devolution, one of it is to ensure that there is equitable share of resources at both national and county level. And I want to speak on the Equalization Fund. Now, this fund was actually established to ensure that it addresses the historical marginalization of areas that has been marginalized within the context of our country. And